You're listening to People Are Animals Too, Darn It, with your host, Mandy Evans, Executive Director of Panhandle Animal Shelter.
Hello and welcome to this episode of People Are Animals Too, Darn It. Today, my guest is Jim Tedford, the President and CEO of the Association of Animal Welfare Advancement. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. So you and I met because you had written a letter about all I remember is the Going Through Hell was a podcast or a series, right, that you brought in people to help animal shelter executives and people building resiliency around some of the challenges we have in animal welfare. So I thought we could talk about that today.
Yeah, that's great. I tell you, it started as a workshop that I and a couple of my colleagues put together for Animal Care Expo 2 years ago, I guess now, or maybe it was just last year. They all run together after as long as I've been doing this. But at any rate, the three of us did a session called "Going Through Hell, Keep on Going." And really what we wanted to focus on was the fact that shelters and the people who run them and work in them tend to, in many situations, have targets painted on our backs. And I think we get the blame for a lot of the sort of ills that are happening out in community and in society. And we're just kind of an easy target when folks disagree philosophically or whatever. And what was interesting about the workshop we did, and we all three are veteran shelter directors, shelter leaders, and so we had all manner of war stories that we could sort of frame this around. And interestingly, at the very beginning of the session, there were maybe 350, 400 people in the room. And I asked for a show of hands, how many of you would consider yourselves to be going through hell right now? And I bet you 75% of the people in that room raised their hands. And it took me back a bit because I thought, I think that the bar for us is pretty high when it comes to the way we define something like going through hell. And the fact that many people in that room felt that's the position they were in right now. I thought, our work is darn hard enough without having to also deal with that level of sort of attack and vitriol that can come from the outside. And quite frankly, sometimes from the inside. And that can be even worse to deal with than the outside forces that can try to work against us. So anyway, long story short, that's the way we sort of circled into this. We then did a webinar series on our learning center, and had extremely high attendance, a lot of interest still in the subject. So we ended up now our upcoming conference, which we've moved to a virtual format, our spring conference in June, is the theme of it is going to sort of be resilience. That's a common thread that runs through a lot of the content. We're still talking about this issue because, self-care is important. We got to take care of ourselves or there's not going to be anybody left to do this crazy work.
Great. So really quickly, you said that you've been involved in animal welfare for quite some time. Do you want to give us just a little bit of background on how you ended up in the position you're in now?
Absolutely. So I feel like I was kind of born into animal welfare. I literally took my first job in an animal shelter fresh out of college. I got my degree in animal science. I had planned to go to veterinary school, and by the time that rolled around, I was exhausted from school and I just wanted a break from it. So I thought I'm going to find a job where I can use the skills that I've learned in school, and I had no idea what direction that was going to take me. I really didn't know what my options even were because I had been so singularly focused on vet school for so long. So I ended up going to the local animal shelter. They were hiring for a shelter manager, and I had no idea what that was. but I staggered in there, and I think they hired me because I was probably the only person they could find willing to work that cheap. Uh, but I walked in thinking, all right, well, I can fix all of this. This overpopulation stuff and all the things that we're dealing with, mass euthanasia of unwanted pets. We'll put a stop to this in no time, and then I'll move on and get a real job a little bit later down the road. Well, that was 36 years ago. So needless to say, once you start doing it, it kind of gets in your blood. It's certainly one of those careers where it's not what we do, but it's who we are in very many ways. So I did that for a while, ended up working for the Humane Society of the United States, running a regional office for about 4 years in middle of my career, and missed the shelter. I really missed the day-to-day hands-on work, the actual contact with animals and people every day. So I ended up working at the Louisiana SPCA in New Orleans back in the early 90s, and then left there to go to work for a place called Lollipop Farm in upstate New York, just outside of Rochester, New York. And it was a wonderful place to be. The shelter was sort of all encompassing and handled about 12,000, 13,000 companion animals a year, but also handled a significant number of farm animals. And we did a lot of large animal rescue work, a lot of cruelty investigations. In fact, while I was there, we did what is still the largest cruelty investigation in New York State history. We seized 321 farm animals from a very small piece of property, and were able to get prosecution, get conviction on 3 defendants, and we got all those animals placed into new homes. So it was a mammoth undertaking for us. But I really wanted to get back to the South. I'm born and raised in the South, and I wanted to get back closer to family. And I got an opportunity to go to work on the for-profit side, helping with direct mail, direct response marketing in the animal welfare sector. And I did that for about 6-7 years, and then this came along, and I've been a member of the association for over 30 years. So in fact, I was the chair of the board about 24 years ago. So I've kind of come full circle, coming back as the second staff CEO in the organization's history. We turned 50 years old this year, and I've been around for 2/3 of that at least.
Okay, so that's an amazing career. It's so nice that you've spent so much time and so much of your life giving back to others. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
So when we talk about resilience and the work, I'm an executive director at a shelter, and I have definitely been put through the ringer in the past. And some of my team says you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because there are always people who have alternative opinions on how you should be working. But I'm wondering, where does optimism, like hopefulness, where does that fit within your view of resilience?
When I walked into this industry 36 years ago, it was a pretty hopeless situation that I walked into. In fact, I kind of laugh now at what stresses people in our industry out today. I'm thinking, wow, if they had been around 35 years ago, they would have lost their minds, because it was a very different and frankly, far more challenging world in which to navigate. My first shelter was a tiny little facility that was old and outdated, and we were holding it together with duct tape and a prayer. And we were handling 14,000 dogs and cats a year through that facility with a staff of 12 people, tiny budget. We had no money. We had any kind of maintenance on the facility we had to do ourselves, and kind of beg, borrow, and steal. And it was a really difficult time. We were basically a euthanasia factory. It's all we did. They would come in and they would go out the back door. Very few had any hope of making it. And quite frankly, that's what drove me. That's what gave me the optimism and the hope for the future. I knew there had to be a better world out there for animals and for people in communities. And I wasn't willing to give up until I saw us make some major headway. Fast forward to today, And that hope really paid off. I mean, we're in a place now where if you're in the Northeast or the upper Midwest, euthanasia is not even really in your vocabulary unless you've got an animal that's suffering beyond hope or so dangerous that you wouldn't want to take a chance putting them back out into the community. So, we've made incredible strides. There is probably not another social movement that can claim the level of success that we've achieved in a really relatively short period of time. 35 years in the scheme of history is really not a lot of time. So we've made major headway by working really hard. It's blood, sweat, and tears, and that can-do positive attitude is so important. I have relied very, very heavily on a sense of humor. I think if we reach a place where we can't find something to laugh about every day, then it's time to move on to the next thing. And I feel the same way about learning. I think, I've been doing this a long time, and I teach a lot of workshops and do a lot of training myself. I don't know it all by any stretch. And the day that I feel like I do is the day I probably need to hang up my keys and and go
Yeah.
and find myself a rocking chair somewhere. I learn every day, and I learn from people from every walk of life in our industry, from every generation that is involved with our work. It's a constant learning experience and a willingness to be flexible and to change attitudes. Sometimes it's really easy to sort of get stuck in that rut where
Yeah.
we feel like ours is the only way, and it's the only right way, and we can't do that. We've got to be open to new ideas and new approaches and new ways of doing things, and at the same time we have to take care of each other and treat each other with the respect and dignity that is deserving of people who invest their lives in this work.
Yeah. Well, and I would say, respect and dignity for everyone as equals, community members, shelter staff. I think it's one of the struggles we have in our sector. I think it's actually everywhere, is that we lack this sense of equality.
Well, we've always had this notion that people on the outside of the sheltering sphere are kind of our enemies. Like they're all out to
Yes.
get us, and they're all out to do horrible things to animals. And I know we went through a long phase in this work where we started asking a lot of questions before we would place an animal into an
Mhm.
adoptive home. And that we took that to extremes. We got to a point where nobody was worthy. I remember talking to an adoption counselor at a shelter in Minnesota once, and she said to me, "Let me tell you how I handle an adoption. I start with no and let them convince me why I should change my mind." And I'm thinking that is not exactly the customer care that is going to win friends and influence people and get people to actually start thinking the right way and change the way that they do things in the world. So we've made, I think, a lot of headway there in terms of now trusting the community. If somebody comes to you to adopt, more than likely the odds are very heavily in their favor that they are there for the right reasons and they're trying to do something really good. And it's our responsibility to coach them through that process and make sure that ultimately the outcome is in their best interest as well as the animal's best interest. And as long as we've done that, what more can we expect? I mean, I can tell you that there have been several instances where I felt like I would not have qualified for adoption under certain people's adoption guidelines, and I'm like the biggest animal welfare lunatic I know. So if I can't pass the test, I'm not sure who's going to pass it.
Well, Mary from Maddie's Fund, she was denied like 3 times recently.
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense when you've got
Yeah.
someone who clearly is invested in the welfare of animals for us to be so judgmental that, if the fence isn't there, isn't the right height, or there's a child that's too young in the household, or if the person works outside the home, they can't possibly manage a puppy, things like that. I mean, we really need to err on the side of giving people the benefit of the doubt that they really are going to to do what's best. And then we also need to back that up with providing the services and the counseling that they need after the point of adoption. I think for too long, we as an industry have seen adoptions as more of a transactional relationship. And instead, we need to support that well beyond the point that they walk out the door for the first time. We want them coming back to buy their dog food and to go to training classes and to drop off donations. That's always helpful too. So I'd much rather have somebody leave my organization feeling like they're invested and that we invested in them, so that they're going to want to come back and be our friend for life.
Yeah, and I feel like I coached you before doing this call, because you're using all my like trigger words, because we say in animal welfare, we do look at this as a transaction. And I use it in terms of, your dog comes in and I'm going to charge you $500 as to reclaim fee. And then I get upset that no one ever comes to get their dogs. So we actually, I think, get in our own way, and we create the reality that we want to fix.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it's all about awakenings. Like, my mind was blown when I was at HSUS conference and listened to the Pets for Life general session, where all the different groups from different shelters stood up and talked about how they took pets away from loving families, all in the name of doing the right thing for animals.
Yeah.
And it just completely changed me.
It's remarkable when you think about, I mean, I look back on my early years, and there were, like, a good example, Halloween. Every year at Halloween time,
Black cats.
back in my early years, we would take all the black cats. In fact, we would take all the kittens and basically stash them someplace in the back of the building where they were inaccessible to the public. Because we just knew that all of these Satanists and devil worshippers were coming in to adopt these kittens, to take them and sacrifice them. And it didn't even make sense if you think about where I was in Tennessee, in a place where you could get kittens off the side of the road from, people would set up at a Walmart parking lot with a basket of kittens and hand them out like candy. You didn't need to come to a shelter and be put through your paces and pay an adoption fee and have the animal spayed or neutered so you could take it and sacrifice it. It didn't even, there's not even really any logic there, but we kind of bought our own bill of goods. And so we put up all these kind of silly barriers. Pets as gifts, we at Christmas time, we would say no adoptions for the week before or the week after. And, now we've evolved to a place where there are shelters who are delivering Christmas pets on Christmas Eve to families who are so thrilled to have them that they don't know what to do with themselves. So it's, you're right. Getting out of our own way was kind of the first barrier. And everything else is easy compared to that.
My other favorite one is when you have home checks for pit bulls. Now, we as a sector industry want everyone to look at pit bulls as completely normal, like every other dog. And yet we say that we have to do a home check if you're getting a pit bull type dog. So we send these mixed messages out to our community.
Yeah, these dogs that are difficult to place simply by virtue of their numbers, because shelters tend to be full of them, and yet we make it next to impossible for somebody to adopt one. So there's not a lot of logic there.
So when we look at, everything that we're talking about does play into resilience, because it's really about the glasses we wear every day. If you wake up and you say, today is going to be a bad day, you will probably view most of your day from that lens. And when you look at every person that comes into a shelter as a bad person, they will live up to your vision of them, right? So if we look at every person as a good person with good intentions, it's likely they'll live up to those expectations. So I feel like really helping the animal welfare sector understand that a lot of this has to do with us and our outlook. So tell me some of the things that you're teaching people on how to be resilient.
Well, so the first thing is, I think it starts with the hiring process as we bring people into our organizations and into our movement, and that's another amazing phenomenon, because suddenly people are actually looking at animal welfare as a viable, purposeful career path. Back when I got into it, almost everybody who was in the field was in it completely by accident and happenstance. And now there are programs, there are training programs and things that prepare people for a lifetime career in animal welfare, which is thrilling for me. But I think as we bring those people in, we need to screen them and set them up for having realistic expectations of what to expect. They're going to see sometimes awful things, and they're going to see sometimes really awful behaviors, and how you handle that and how you rebound from that really speaks volumes in terms of your character, and I think your ability to be successful in probably just about any job, but certainly in our industry. So I think we need to do a better job of making sure that we're bringing people in and preparing them. Once we have them in, then we also need to set them on a path for success, which means that we need to offer them training, and we need to offer them things that are going to help them succeed. Those resources, like healthcare resources and things that are just going to set them up to be better employees and better people. The other thing that I really am pushing for heavily is this work-life balance thing. I think I talk to people in other industries all the time, and I know that it's not just an animal welfare problem, but I think in animal welfare and in any other industry where your commodity is your mission, I think people tend to just really get out of balance. We feel like that we're never doing enough. There are never enough hours in the day. And I tell people all the time, if all you do is work, then you're eventually, and probably in relatively short order, going to burn out and maybe never realize it, but you're going to reach a point where your productivity as an animal welfare advocate is going to diminish drastically. So we have a real obligation to take care of ourselves and to teach people how to do that and how to balance, have other things in their lives that don't have anything to do with the animal shelter or animal welfare. It doesn't, your hobby cannot be fostering kittens. You have got to be able to kind of get beyond that. Go plant a garden or read a book or kayak down a river or go camping or whatever it is that sort of re-energizes you. Find it and do it. Commit to doing it, and you're gonna last a whole lot longer. You're going to be a much more well-rounded person, which is going to make you much better at your job. So I emphasize that all the time. I mean, and I'll be honest, there were many years where I did not take my own advice very well there at all. But in my latter years, I have actually really kind of achieved that. I've got 5 grandkids that are like the light of my life. I've got my little dogs who love to go for very long walks. I've got a 30-year-old quarter horse that is my therapist.
Oh.
I love to plant things and garden, and I love to travel when we can travel. And so there's a lot. There's a lot of balance in my world, and I think that makes me a stronger leader in animal welfare.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons that people in animal welfare work so much is because there never feels like there's enough people, resources to get things done. When I bring people in from the corporate sector, it's funny because they'll come and say, so does somebody clean in the office at night? I'm like, yeah, you. And then what about who's the communication person that edits everything that goes out? I'm like, we don't have a communication person. Like, everybody wears multiple hats because you have to. And so if you're really driven to get somewhere and get some things done, it can become addictive to
Well, and
continue working.
I think we also tend to have this a little bit of a hero complex where we feel like nobody is ever going to care as much as I do. So I've got to stay here and hunker down and get it done, because these other people are great, but they're never going to care like I care. They're never going to be as committed to this as I am committed to this. And the truth is that we're all committed to it. And by working as a team and in a collective and sharing some of that workload and freeing people up to actually have a life, we're going to be a much stronger force.
Which means management requiring and supporting people taking sick time, giving them vacation time, setting up policies and procedures that support the health of their team. And you at the conferences, you know, we could have some crafting classes. I could teach people how to needle felt. It's basically stabbing things at night. Can really get some good energy out.
That's excellent. Yeah, you know, that's a really good point. We spend a lot of time in terms of our online learning. We have the Learning Center now, which offers a whole array of learning from your desktop, which has been great for folks who have a hard time getting away or don't have the budget for traveling to a face-to-face conference. But even the face-to-face events, we really do need to, we push becoming better leaders. It's professional development. It's about developing yourself as a professional. But we also really do need to emphasize more the developing yourself as a human being as well. It's really funny, the spring conference that we've moved to an online format now because of the pandemic. When we were going to be live in Chicago in mid-June, we had made the decision that we were going to do early morning yoga classes every day. One of our members is a yoga instructor from way back, and she was going to lead some classes for folks just to get their day started off on a positive note. So yeah, I think that's great advice. I think it's something we could do a little bit more of.
I've only been to one conference. I want to go to more, but I found it exhausting. It was in the fall, and I think it was because it was so much about focused on yourself. And I don't know, I would sit there and I'm like, I'm exhausted. I'm self-assessing all day long. But it was really great. I met so many wonderful people. And I'm looking forward to going back again. So let's hope that all of this.
I think that's really one of the things about the conference that really makes it stand out is that it really is a network. And, you know, I think networking is an often overused term in corporate America, but I tell you, the strength of our organization is really in the network. It's knowing that if you are having a problem of any kind, there's somebody in that network that you can reach out to for advice or assistance. And if you just need to yell at somebody who's safe, that you've got friends in the network that will take care of that for you. We've got all kinds of great communication tools like our Facebook groups and things where members can go to connect with one another and share ideas and thoughts and you know, any kind of challenges that they may be facing. But the real power, I've for 30 years, I've looked forward to those conferences because it's an opportunity to reconnect with people who get it, who really, and no, most of the people in our world, you know, most of the people in your family and in your inner circle don't really quite get what it is that you do. And you go to a conference and you're with 500-600 people who all do the same thing, so they all completely understand what it is you do. There's some real value and real strength and power in that.
I think there's also a sense of pride when you go to that conference, because there are people that take pride in the fact they've been to it every year for years and that they've been a member for a really long time. It kind of creates like a special club feeling. And it's not because it's exclusive. I think it's because of that networking that people feel connected, like they're a part of a family.
Yeah, we don't get to see each other every day. You know, we see each other maybe 3 or 4 times a year tops. So to take advantage of those opportunities is huge. The other thing that I will stress is that I think new folks coming to the conference for the first time sometimes feel like they have a hard time breaking into that network. And I always say to them that you're going to get out of it what you put into it. So when you come to the conference or when you communicate with other members through any of our communications channels, animals, really important that you put yourself out there. I stumbled into my first conference. I didn't know very many people at all. I'm thankfully I'm not a particularly shy person, but I invited myself to dinner with folks, and I just sort of pushed myself into conversations, and I was welcomed when I did that. But I think some of these people, because they don't see each other very often, get together at the conference and they circle and forget to bring in the new folks. I try to do that. I try to be very conscious about doing it, but not everybody is that conscious of it. So if you're a new person breaking into this industry, then just put yourself out there. I promise you that you'll be welcome with open arms.
Yeah, I was lucky because Bill Templeman with Pet Health had me come out and do a dinner, and just having that small group. And then there was this ripple effect, because then one of those people would see me and say, "Oh, have you met this person?" And now I'm connecting with people from afar based on relationships I made at the conference.
I'm thrilled to hear that, because that's exactly the way it should work.
So let's move into the future. Now, you have been at this for a while, and there's a lot of talk about how, because of COVID, we are going to switch our direction and try to keep animals out of shelters. How do you feel about that? I guess I should say, have you heard that?
Yeah, yep, I have. I think it's a wonderful new concept. And again, I think we always need to be looking for new ways of doing the work we do. The one thing that concerns me about anything new that pops up in the industry, though, is making sure that we don't leave anybody behind, because I think there's a tendency to forget that we're not all in the same place when it comes to the sort of the evolution of our communities in the animal welfare world. So, there are still shelters around this country, mostly in rural or remote areas, where they're still dealing with a significant level of overpopulation. They're still having to make decisions, life and death decisions, on healthy puppies every day. Most of the folks in the Northeast and the Upper Midwest and the West Coast really have a hard time even imagining that. A lot of organizations I talk to in New England, for example, most of the animals they're adopting out are animals that are being brought up from other places where there still are too many. So I think that's the one my one caveat is, let's as we look to develop new policies and recommendations and programming for the field, let's make sure that we don't forget the least among us, and that we bring them along at whatever pace they can come along. I think it's also really important to remember that shelters can establish all the policies that they want in the universe, but the reality is that shelters are not the be all and end all. The world doesn't start and stop at our walls. So the issues that we're grappling with are community-based issues. So we need to find community-based solutions. And I think things like more aggressive foster programs make great sense. Keep these animals out. They're always going to be better off in a home than they are in a shelter. So, always open to that, but remember that it's the community, it's not the shelter. We tend to be very shelter-centric in our thinking, and it's not just about the shelter.
But I think that that's what I'm seeing as the switch, is that we call it community collaboration sheltering, where the idea that we're going to solve our problems just within the four walls of our building is kind of silly. But it has been the way that we've operated for a really long time. And I have the opportunity to talk to shelters in the South, and I feel for them, because there's a lot of challenges there. And they don't think their community is, some of them, not everybody, will think that their community is not worthy of their animals, so they will send them to a better community. And my thought is, if we had a scared dog come into the shelter, we would nurture it. We would see what we could do to curb behavior. But yet, in a community, we won't take the time to influence, nurture, and understand the needs of our community. We're just going to say, you're not worthy. So I think what I see as our future is really trying to move this needle, where shelters, even in the worst case scenario, if they could just focus on how do we get our community members to be partners with us in this, we can accomplish a lot more. I'm hopeful that that's what we're going to see.
Yeah.
But it does
Yeah.
take some pretty significant cultural, like the equality, getting people to understand. In this conversation with someone, it was brilliant because she's really wants to change her culture and wants to see some partnering with the community. And she said, but you know, I look at them and think they want to buy cigarettes rather than paying for flea medication for their dog. And she said, oh, I just did it. I shamed somebody. And I'm like, it's okay. It's just, I mean, the fact that you called yourself out on it is growth. But then she says, but Mandy, since the COVID things happened, the best thing is people are stepping up and they want to foster. And I'm like, yes, right there. Hold on to that. Your community wants to help. They want to be a part of this. It's up to you to empower them to be a part of the solution.
Right. Don't treat them right out of the gate as though they are somehow the enemy or other than you are, because they're not other. They are you. You are them. They're all part of the same, biosphere that you're living in. So it's really important to treat them like a part of the solution and not just the source of the problem.
So that's the change. That's what I'm pushing for. That's why we started the podcast, was to try to get that message out.
Yeah, good for you. Well, the world is significantly better now than it was 35 years ago, and 35 years from now, I hope that somewhere I can actually watch and see the progress that's happening then. I think, shelters as they are now have for years we've worked to make ourselves obsolete. It's cliche, but we've said we want to work ourselves out of business, and we're kind of getting there. We're really getting to the point where by empowering people in the community to be part of the solution, but then our buildings are going to take on a completely different meaning and a different purpose than what they have in the past. We are no longer just the repository of unwanted animals or the source for adoptions. We're a piece of the greater community and looking outside the walls. And I think we're gradually going to get to a place where the vast majority of our work is going to take place outside of the facility.
Yeah, and I think the next step is granting organizations and the larger groups that are seeking data from shelters need to start asking for their community numbers. What are you doing? How many animals did you prevent ever coming into the building? Because right now, we're sending that message that that's what's important, is the animals coming in. And even donors are looking at how many animals do you have in cages. And so I think shelters are having a difficult time with this concept of putting themselves out of business, because they're still basing their value off of the old system. So they're transferring in to fill shelters, to fill kennels, so that they can say that they're doing their work. We got to stop that.
Yeah. Instead, we need to change the work and change the focus of the work in so many ways. Interestingly, there's a project that I've been a part of for the last couple of years that PetSmart Charities has spearheaded. And the fundamental objective of the project is to develop a community index where we can really look at the well-being of animals in the context of community. So it's not just a shelter measure. We're not just looking at intake and outcome for shelter animals. We're looking at what's happening in the community holistically. So it's things like housing and unemployment and the economy in general, and the availability of jobs and the availability of veterinary care and access to that care. All of those things are factors that will be factored into this index. So we're looking at the community holistically and not just looking at one little piece of it. And the project is well underway, and it's really exciting. I can't wait till it's done. It's being piloted now in a few communities, so we'll see how the pilot goes and what changes need to be made in order for it to be rolled out at a bigger level. But boy, how exciting is that and it puts us in a position of having to work with other communities community leaders beyond just the animal welfare sector. We're having to work with all different social service providers and the government and big business and whatever we have in our community. We've all got to rally together to make the community better in general for animals and for people.
Love it. Love it. It's that whole concept of, is it One Health?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of like Pollyanna because I'm like you, optimistic. I think I can find humor in pretty much everything, just sometimes really inappropriate.
That's all right. It's my favorite kind of humor.
But so we have a therapist that does work with our shelter to help us understand human behavior. And one of the things he says is that if you are laughing and having fun, then that fear, the lizard part of your brain, isn't fully activated. And if you can't have fun and all of that, then you're in a dangerous place because you're, filled with fear, anger, whatever. So we try to have as much fun as we possibly can.
That's brilliant. I talk to boards of directors all the time, and boards can be a source of great stress and consternation for leadership staff, and they can be really kind of grumpy groups in and of themselves. And I tell them all the time, look, this is what you're doing in your volunteer time. This is you're supposed to be enjoying this and finding it fulfilling. If all it is doing is creating angst in you, then it may be time to move on to something else. free up that board seat for somebody who's willing to step in here and put it in perspective.
Yes, I love that. It's true. Well, I think the next time we have a physical conference, we need to hang out.
Let's do it.
We can have
I love it.
Inappropriate jokes.
I like that as well.
A few new people.
That's perfect. That's perfect. I love it. It's my favorite part of the whole conference is meeting new people. I love being able to get together and find out what makes other people tick.
Yeah, I loved it too, because I get the biggest kick out of hearing about the wonderful work that so many people are doing, unique work. I think it's really exciting and fun.
Yeah. There's some great ideas out there, and they're ripe for the stealing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that in general, in our world, people really want to be seen, especially in animal welfare, because these people are working their tails off trying to make a difference and saying, look at me, I'm doing really amazing work.
I want to be recognized for innovation.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I'm excited to, well, we'll see, maybe fall conference, maybe.
I'm keeping all my fingers and toes crossed for that one.
I know. I don't know that it's going to happen, but you know what? We're surviving. We're getting by. It's going to be okay. If we have to wait till next year, we wait till next year.
Better safe than sorry.
That's right. Well, thank you for joining me, and you're listening to People Are Animals Too, Darn It. If you want more information or you're interested in some additional content, please make a comment and let us know. Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.